Clefable is an often infuriating sight for many competitive battlers. It can feel impossible to KO even for strong Pokemon. It tends to stick around over the course of a game and generally is just extremely annoying to deal with. On top of that, look at Clefable's face. It looks like it's having a great time while it's making you suffer the most. At least Toxapex has the decency to not pretend like it's nice. However, at least at first glance, the case of Clefable's seemingly immortality and eternally obnoxious in-game presence can be a bit of a mystery. Yeah, there's the obvious case of Magikarp being one of the very best abilities in the game, and Clef has plenty of other good to great traits beyond that, but when teams stacked to the brim with some of the strongest Pokemon in the game begin to fall over themselves, unable to harm this Pokemon that doesn't even have impressive stats, then it's easy for one to feel a bit confused. It's not a wall like GSC Raikou, whose defensive capabilities in large part have to do with how fast it is. Nah, Clefable is really slow, and it's almost always moving after the Pokemon it's dominating. To draw another lofty comparison again from GSC, this is not dissimilar to Snorlax in this generation, as is another off-puzzling aspect of Clefable's consistency, which is the fact that it does so despite being incredibly predictable. We'll just ignore Clefable's incredible capacity to catch the opponent off guard if it chooses to do so. That certainly helps make it even better than it already is, but for the most part, Clefable is not putting in work by surprising you. So what we have here is a Pokemon that's slow, not that bulky, and largely predictable. Why then is Clefable always good? Ever since it became a fairy type, it has been one of OU's most eternally dominating Pokemon, despite sharing the tier with some of the most broken threats ever conceived. Even without its fairy type, it's similarly incredible in Generation 4 OU. We see similar stories in other tiers that non-fairy Magikarp Clef has appeared in, from its debut in Generation 4 UU, to continued success in Generation 5 RU, to even making good and establishing a legitimate place in Generation 4 Ubers. What is it that makes Clef so good? We know it just can't be Magikarp, because as good as Alakazam and Reuniclus are, they haven't come close to matching Clef's dominance, and to say nothing of Sigilyph. It is also not just the fairy typing, as evidenced by a nearly resistless Clefable succeeding not just in Gen 4 OU, but Ubers. Well, one of the many joys of competitive Pokemon is uncovering such mysteries, and that's what we're gonna do today, as we answer the question, why the hell is this pink blob so annoying and so good? If you do enjoy this video, make sure you let me know by leaving a like, and also subscribe if you're new to the channel. I upload competitive Pokemon every single day. The first thing we must mention is, of course, Magikarp. Yes, Unaware Clefable has its place, but this video is not being made because of that set. It's all about Clefable's seemingly immortality through the ignoring of indirect damage. Clefable's nigh unparalleled longevity and our frustrated responses to it are testament to how accustomed we are to passive damage helping us out in weakening and KOing things. For comparison, look at pretty much anything else. The closest a non-Magikarp Pokemon comes to replicating this Immortal-esque quality is Poison Heal Gliscor, thanks to its immunity to spikes and status. It even has advantages over Clef in its increased recovery, as well as not fearing the sorts of its recovery if its Toxic Orb is knocked off post-activation. However, even something like Gliscor is affected by Stealth Rock, even if only neutrally, and this is absolutely enormous, potentially putting it into a KO range or OHKO range from powerful attacks it would otherwise be able to withstand. For example, special defensive Gliscor is never 2-hit KO'd by Mega Diance's Moonblast, but with Stealth Rock up, suddenly it's not quite so safe. Clefable doesn't have this problem. Some players criticize Clef for needing to remain at full health in order to wall stronger attackers, and this is quite true. It usually walls something just barely by the skin of its teeth. However, this is often more of a theoretical criticism, as in practice this does not hold it back much, if at all, precisely because its immunity to passive damage makes it so easy to remain at full health, since it also has the outstanding benefit of an instant recovery move. It really demonstrates just how much even teams that are quite aggressive rely on indirect methods of damage, and not just entry hazards either, although that alone is huge. Heatran's Lava Plumes are toxic, Rotom Wash Will-O-Wisp, Ferrothorn's Leech Seed, Tyranitar's Sandstorm, a million different Scald users, the list goes on. These are all tactics that nobody could consider passive and are commonly used on aggressive, fast-based teams. Against nearly everything besides Clef, they are very difficult to switch into and handle, and as a result are outstanding makers of progress that are commonly used as such. However, Clefable alone completely invalidates such enormous swaves of pressure most of these teams possess. But what about direct damage? Why is Clefable so seemingly impossible to KO even through this route? Well, part of this is definitely attributes to Magikarp. As mentioned, this and reliable recovery make it easy for Clef to remain healthy. However, this would be all for naught if Clefable didn't have the bulk to actually withstand attacks from heavy hitters. But is this not the case, you ask? Its HP and defenses aren't that impressive at all. And yet, clearly Clefable does have the bulk to do so, because it's regularly devouring some of the strongest attacks around. How does this work? On one hand, it's true, Clefable does not have the bulk to take on everything, at the same time at least. However, this is where the magic of EV spreads come in, and this is where Clefable demonstrates just how deceptively tanky it is. With a physically defensive spread, it devours Earthquake from Landorus Therian easily. This is Landorus T, a Pokemon with near Groudon levels of attack, and yet Bold Clefable takes its hits well. That's just the beginning. It too can survive super effective hits from Life Orb Bisharp. It's overwhelmingly favored to take 2 Choice Band Iso Crashes from Weavile. The same is true of 2 Swords Dance boosted Earthquakes from Gliscor. If we flip to the special defensive side, the feats are even more impressive thanks to Clefable's naturally higher special defensive stat. It shrugs off 2 Choice Specs Keldeo Scalds, even avoiding a 2-hit KO if it loses its leftovers. The same is true for an even stronger attack. Psychic from a modest Mega Alakazam. It even devours Specs Latios' Psychic, a move originally chosen specifically for its ability to 2-hit KO other variants of Clefable. Of course, Clefable does not need to go max on either side. It most commonly runs some sort of mixed spread, which it manages to take hits on both sides of the spectrum frustratingly well. For example, it only needs 88 special defense EVs with a calm nature to avoid a 2-hit KO from Specs Keldeo Scald with leftovers included, leaving it plenty of room for defense EVs to tank Earthquakes. Even if it runs 144 special defense to take 2 Scalds even if it loses its lefties, there's still a chunk of defense. A little goes a long way with stats like Clefable. There are seemingly endless examples and possibilities of this. Also worth noting, these selected examples are incredibly strong attacks, and Clef still takes multiple of them, so just imagine how effortlessly Clefable takes on the lighter hits that are everywhere throughout metagames, and you can't exactly help yourself out in KOing it like you would most any other wall with passive damage either. Sure, there are Pokemon out there that can threaten Clefable with huge damage like Nidoking, but what makes Clefable even more obnoxious is what it does once it hits the field. As much as it may seem so, it is decidedly not just a hit-taking blob. In fact, its deep support and offensive move pool is so excellent not just because of how it can support its team, but because it can limit the opponent's method of dealing with it. If it wasn't, it'd be as simple as sending in Nidoking or Excadrill or Mega Metagross or whatever. However, it's not the case. First of all, the viable pool of Pokemon that can actually threaten Clefable with huge damage immediately and or reliably is quite limited. Second of all, of this limited pool, depending on the Clef set, few of those Pokemon will actually want to switch into it. It's not like Clef has to dig deep into its move pool for some otherwise obscure counter-specific anti-move either. Moves it already regularly wants to spam like Knock Off and Thunder Wave are so widely encompassing that it's no wonder many Pokemon don't want to switch into them. Clef's commonly used coverage moves are used for similar reason, because they hit common Pokemon really hard. So if you can't directly send in your hard hitters against Clefable, what do you wind up doing? You usually wind up semi-stalemating it with a bulky Pokemon that has some form of recovery. Not a dedicated wall necessarily, just something offensively minded with some longevity, like Tornadus Therian and its Regenerator. But since we don't know how bulky Clef is, you're certainly not threatened to KO it with such a Pokemon, so no wonder it seems that it never goes down. And of course, you can't get too passive against Clef, because if you try to sit on it, it'll start boosting with Calm Mind. Obviously, a significant part of this has to do with Clefable's set, the team matchup, and the game situation, but the overall principles very much apply. We'll now look at examples of Clefable doing what it does across the OU metagames it had Magic Guarded. Contrary to popular belief, Clefable's popularity in DPP was not a result of its explosion in XY. It had already been explored slightly by some creative-minded players in the current gen, who stacked it alongside other hazard, resilient Pokemon like Bronzong and Gliscor on experimental yet tournament-successful teams. Clef really made a name for itself as a viable choice while Black and White was the main generation. Then of course X and Y came out, and Clefable was on everyone's mind, and it wasn't yet a DPP staple, so it's understandable that many newer players seeing it slowly rise in usage thought that this was a result of players looking back after its Generation 6 success. In Generation 4, the Fairy type doesn't exist, and Clefable is Normal type, which famously lacks resistances. This doesn't hold Blissey back because of its absurd, insane bulk, but Clef doesn't have those raw stats. However, with the combination of Magic Guard, just good enough bulk, instant recovery, and its tremendous move pool, Clefable manages to be one of the most reliable walls and one of the most irritating Pokemon to switch into in the entire metagame. Despite resisting nothing that isn't Shadow Ball, Clefable still withstands a great deal of DPP offense. When it first came to establish a real role in the metagame, beyond early experiments, its initial claim to fame was its Calm Mind variant, destroying the popular stall teams of the time, while still having utility against offense since with a calm nature and special defense investment, it boasted the impressive trait of being able to withstand 2 Life Orb Starmie Hydro Pumps. This also meant it took 2 Heatran Fire Blasts. To withstand such powerful hits without resisting them, and of course not being weak to the coverage move these Pokemon carried, was incredible. incredible. Clefable soon showed it was more than just a Calm Minder too. It began running utility sets, spamming knockoff to great effect, and even establishing itself as one of the tier's most reliable stealth rocker since it put Rapid Spin Starmie to shame. No matter which set it ran though, Clefable was great because it was able to so effectively withstand sources of pressure, both direct and indirect damage, and strike back meaningfully in return. It completely invalidated old forms of stall and forced hazard abusing offenses to reevaluate their strategies. Toxic Spike offense could stack their layers and then go to town with offensive Suicune and Jirachi since Clef sat on them so hard. When Latias returned to the tier, Clefable showed off its most amazing trait yet. It was a non-steel, non-Tyranitar, non-Blissey Pokemon that could take 2 Specs Draco Meteors from it. It proceeded to demonstrate that it didn't just have to be a special wall either. It had already shown flashes of excellence in walling on both sides of the spectrum by virtue of its ability to completely stuff Mixed Flygon, taking both its Stab Draco Meteor and Earthquake powered by Life Orb. Mixgon was famously nearly impossible to switch into safely without risking a KO, and what's more, Clef did so while being immune to the spikes that Mixgon was so commonly paired with. Spikes that impeded other would-be Mixgon answers like Hippowdon and Quagsire to the point of no longer being answers at all. However, Clef eventually shifted to running bold sets, and this made it even harder to deal with, because it eliminated one of the few weak points Clefable had previously, its vulnerability to physical moves. Sure, it did this at the cost of being a nigh immovable special wall, but that was nothing its teammates couldn't cover. And the benefits were huge. With a bold nature and maximum defense, Clefable did incredible things. It commonly avoided 2-hit KOs from Choice Band or Dragon Dance boosted Gyarados' Waterfall. It survived Heatran's Explosion. It even performed the mind-melting feats of living several of the tier's most powerful fighting type attacks. Machamp's Dynamic Punch, Scarf Lucario's Close Combat, potentially even Breloom's Superpower. With the ability to withstand such monstrous hits, as well as its complete immunity to the passive damage that characterized much of DPP, like burns from Rotom and Heatran, Leech Seed from Shaman, hazards, and permanent Sandstorm. In fact, Clefable was one of the 2 Pokemon in DPP that healed in permanent Sandstorm despite not being Rock, Steel, or Ground type. The other was Poison Heal Breloom, and while Loom was great and its longevity was fairly stellar, it was no Clef in that regard. Also on the subject of Shaman, it used to be one of the most common Pokemon in the metagame, and now it's no longer seen. Why? There were plenty of good special walls to it before Clefable became popular. Yes, that's true, but Clef was immune to its Leech Seed. And if all that wasn't good enough, the recently discovered knockoff mechanics have made Clefable even more difficult to manage. For example, Trick Iron Ball Metagross was previously a solid Clefable answer even if it got its Iron Ball knocked off on the switch, because it could still use Trick and steal something's item. Now, however, if it eats knockoff, it is no longer able to use Trick and receive another item, making Clef even more oppressive. Finally, Generation 4 Clefable has a unique quality with Magic Guard that it doesn't present in other generations. It cannot be fully paralyzed, which is absolutely incredible. Can you imagine if this was the case in the generation where it's a fairy type, as if it needed the help being more insufferable in those. As a fun aside, the most extreme example of Clefable stretching its bulk to withstand huge hits was demonstrated through its viability in DPP Ubers. No, it wasn't taking Specs Kyogre's Water Spout or anything too ridiculous, and it was quite a specific choice, but it was regularly switching into the most popular variants of Dialga and Mewtwo, of all things, while even blanking several variants of Giratina Origin, and of course, completely ruining stall teams. Oh, and Clef was amazing in UU too. Nothing like completely blanking enormous portions of teams popularized by bulky balanced staples like Milotic, Venusaur, Registeel, Mismagius, Arcanine, or Moltres. In short, Clef could do no wrong in Generation 4. What's interesting about Magikarp Clef and its hit-taking ability is that it does have limits, as evidenced by its lack of usage in Generation 5 OU. A metagame so absurdly littered by Sandstorm and Spikes that Excadrill was unbanned from Ubers so it could rapid spin them away. The presence of fellow Magic Guarders Alakazam and Reuniclus won't stop Clef in later generations either. Their roles were different. The reason Clef couldn't keep it up in Gen 5 were changed in Gen 6, which is why it became such an instant success. Generation 5 power level was simply too high for Clefable to get by without any resists. The water moves it previously devoured were too strong when backed by Permanent Rain. The Specs Latias' Draco Meteors it had switched into before had been replaced by Specs Latios Draco Meteor that blew it away. Even something like Heatran can now be sun boosted, and new threats like Volcarona and the Genies would have been staggeringly powerful even by DPP Uber standards. Plus, it wasn't just neutral attacks. Fighting type offense from Keldeo, Terrakion, and a rejuvenated Breloom was everywhere. Sure, Clefable would be immensely useful against spike stacking teams, but unlike other Pokemon that could also do this, Clefable was also completely useless against teams with any semblance of direct aggression. Of course, Clefable was absolutely amazing in Generation 5 RU, but that's for another time and place. Point being, it just couldn't handle OU's power level. Generation 6 changed this big time. Clefable went from having next to no resist with normal typing to having some of the best resist in the game with Fairy. Of course, it was immune to Dragon of all things, which completely shifted the game away from Outrage and Draco Meteor spam that had characterized a great deal of the previous generation's offensive output. I mean, Clefable went from losing a ton of its health to basically getting leftovers if it switched into Dragon move. However, nearly as important was Clefable's resistance to fighting, and not far behind was its resistance to Dark now. It could be used to switch into Choice Band close combats and crunches from Terrakion and Tyranitar respectively. It wasn't even about resisting powerful stab moves either. No longer being weak to Focus Blast was huge for Clef's ability to take on threats like Thundurus and Alakazam. The cherry on top? Clef even gained a resistance to U-turn. This greatly increased its defensive outreach, but things didn't stop there. Permanent weather was gone. Suddenly, Clefable eating offensive water type attacks was back on the menu. Furthermore, Clef would now take less from damage from several powerful attacks: Fire Blast, Hydro Pump, Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, Surf, which had all had their base power lowered and thus made Clef even better as a tank. Sure, Clef would hit a little less hard if it chose to use these moves itself, but that was significantly outweighed by the fact that Clef now had an actual stab move, Moonblast, which was given the 95 base power that had been taken away from Flamethrower, Thunderbolt, and Ice Beam. To make matters even better, Clefable had been given 10 extra base special attack in Generation 6, so it was actually hitting harder with those moves than it did before. Of course, Clefable's bread and butter came from its walling ability, and the bulky sets it used early in X and Y formed the foundation of its role throughout its time as a fairy type. Additionally, thanks to its excellent matchups against most defoggers, which made sense since Clef had an advantage matchup against so many Pokemon in general, it was intensely reliable at maintaining Stealth Rock throughout the course of the game. What's so impressive is the fact that this Mon, thanks to the principles of Magic Guard, Bulk, and Move Pool that we talked about earlier, managed to become a fantastic wall, even the chaotic metagame featuring hilariously broken Pokemon like Aegislash and Mega Mawile. Sometimes it was even the one keeping some of these broken monsters in check. The first example was in X and Y when it was one of the very few Pokemon in the game to be able to counter Greninja, investing enough special defense to always tank 2 Life Orb Hydro Pumps, and it was by far the best answer because it wasn't ruined by spikes like other quote-unquote checks would be. Clef was so clearly the only thing holding the metagame together against Greninja that when ORAS came around and Greninja gained Gunk Shot, which blew Clef away, Gren was just about instantly banned. Another example of Clef holding the metagame together against a broken threat was in Ultra Sun and Moon when Bolt Clefable with max defense was used to withstand 2 Choice Band 1000 arrows from Zygarde, again, because of its resilience to indirect chip damage from Greninja's spikes. Furthermore, if you consider Toxapex broken as many do, Clef is the perfect switch into its Scald Toxic Antics, providing crucial relief in both Generation 7 and 8. So besides taking hits, how did Clef meaningfully respond? After all, it couldn't just take hits, it had to do something back. Well, fortunately, it has absolutely no problem doing so. One of the best things about Clef was that it was doing a great job defensively almost no matter what set it chose. Obviously, depending on the team. It'd be sometimes wanting to run certain moves such as Ice Beam for Gliscor, but it generally had a ton of freedom to experiment and find an array of diversity and effectiveness in its many sets. In the broadest sense, it generally went with either a utility set or a Calm Mind set. However, it doesn't tell the whole picture. Even with the Calm Mind set, it was still immensely useful defensively. It just now also had the potential to take over games with its terrifying sweeping potential. On the flip side, though utility sets didn't boost, they could be just as threatening and obnoxious thanks to Clefable's seemingly endless move pool. Whether it was reliably keeping up the rocks that its teammates needed, knocking opponents' items off, spreading paralysis, passing Wish to its teammates, or some combination thereof, to say nothing of other fantastic moves it could run effectively like Encore. However, even the utility versus Calm Mind binary could be broken, most commonly because one of Clefable's most classic Calm Mind variants ran Thunder Wave as an auxiliary move, fully taking advantage of Moonblast's excellent coverage for a role as a mono attacker. But Clef could take this even further and run both Stealth Rock and Calm Mind on the same set. A combination that seems almost unthinkable, yet if there's anything that could successfully pull it off, it was Clef, and it did just that. Why did it work? Well, at first, it wanted to take advantage of ORAS Defog Zapdos, ridding Clefable of Stealth Rock. This was really important because at the time, Rock's Clef was huge for its ability to reliably force out the Magic Bounce user Mega Sableye, and to deny the defogger Mega Sableye was often paired with, which made Clef just that much more important in helping beat Stall. However, over time, this set demonstrated its excellence beyond just this, because the traits that we have gone over that have established why Clefable is so eternally excellent meant that it stuck around all game, and had the move pool to both set rocks early and threaten to sweep later, which is simply on another level. Few Pokemon in any tier across history can boast this kind of versatility and reliability. Speaking of versatility, Clefable could go more offensive too, especially in Ultra Sun and Moon, where a brutal Life Orb set reared its head and shredded balanced teams not expecting it to hit so hard, all while retaining its incredible longevity in the face of status-littered Toxapex balanced teams. It could even get funky with Trick. As was most common in Sword and Shield, Clef was so good at performing its walling duties with just 3 moves that it could run Trick with a Choice Scarf or Sticky Barb, which came with the benefit of completely ruining a Pokemon on the opposition. But of course, Generation 8 had to have the most iconically immortal, infuriating, annoying, I'm actually getting mad just thinking about it, Clefable set with the Wish Teleport. This elevated Clefable to new heights of obnoxiousness as it reliably kept not just itself but also its teammates perpetually healthy through large HP wishes and abusing Gen 8's monstrously buffed teleport. Now at this point, Clefable already had a long history of shaping and defining metagames, but this was just ridiculous. It was the metagame. Players bemoan both its omnipresence and its unstoppable reliability at doing what it did again and again and again. And that sentence perfectly encapsulates Clefable's existence and this video. Throughout its tenure as an iconic pink blob, on par with and potentially even surpassing the duo of Chansey and Blissey, Clefable has, like those two, been a metagame standard that completely stuffed other metagame standards. Except Clefable's done it without the duo's comically overblown stats, which has puzzled some players. We hope the reasons it has had such incredible success for what initially seems like such an unassuming Pokemon have been made clear to you now. It's a combination of Magic Guard, its incredible move pool, and deceptively good defensive stats, as well as the numerous benefits of the Fairy typing in generations 6 through 8. Though of course Clef was already making OU players tear their hair out over its unkillability through methods both direct and indirect while still being a normal type back in generation 4. After watching this video, Clefable's eternal success should no longer be a mystery to you. I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, like I said, leave a like, consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in tomorrow's video. Except you, Clef. I hope I don't see you.